Welcome to the Holiday Podcast, where we sit over some fresh-baked challah bread on Friday afternoons here at my table. I'm your host, Tammy Priest, a Jewish follower of Jesus, and it's great to be with you again this week as we take another look at this intersection of the old and the new. So along with my challah bread today, I also have some hamantashen, which are traditional cookies eaten on the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is today. And Purim is the celebration of Queen Esther and her cousin Mordechai's victory over Haman during the Persian Empire, which is found in the book of Esther in the Old Testament. And these cookies, which you can see if you're watching the video version, are called hamantashen after Haman. And tashen means pocket because these cookies are folded up on three sides with kind of a pocket, and there's some kind of sweet filling inside. And the tradition is that this refers to Haman hiding bribe money in his pockets. So there's your Purim trivia for today. Ours are filled with raspberry, caramel, or Nutella. Anyway, so for our chat about the intersection of the old and the new today, I thought I would talk about Mordechai. I know that people usually focus on Esther, especially at women's events, but her cousin Mordechai was pretty amazing, and it was really his bold faith that pushed Esther to stand up and be bold in hers. So let me read to you the introductory description of Mordechai from chapter 2 in the book of Esther. In the fortress of Shushan, or Susa, there lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into exile along with King Jeconiah of Judah, which had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Okay, so Mordecai's one-sentence introduction is jam-packed with information and hard names. But in a nutshell, it tells us that Mordecai had a really impressive pedigree. First, he was a descendant of Kish, the father of Saul, who was the first king of Israel. And since Kish was the great grandson of Benjamin, the youngest one of Jacob's children, that meant that Mordecai was also from the tribe of Benjamin. And that's significant because when the kingdom split before the exile, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin had stayed loyal to the house of David. And so as a Benjaminite, Mordecai would have been considered this really loyal, ultra-patriotic and authentic Jew among the exiles. Now also, since Mordecai's family, which is also Esther's family, remember, since they were taken into captivity with King Jeconiah, they had been part of the king's court. Some people actually speculate that they were part of the king's family. But that is not all. Because not only did Mordecai have this impressive standing among his fellow Jews, but we also see later on, as this story unfolds, that Mordecai had royal standing in the Persian court also. So Mordecai really was a pretty impressive guy. And yet, the very first description of him in Scripture has nothing to do with his standing among people. Remember? It says, in the fortress of Shushan lived a Jew. The very first thing the author wants us to know about Mordecai is his identity as one of God's people. And this speaks volumes about who Mordecai was on the inside. Because according to Esther 9:20, Mordecai is actually the author of the book of Esther. And so as the author, Mordecai controlled the spin, right? He could have chosen anything to stand out first about who he was when he wrote the scroll that was distributed throughout the entire Persian Empire. And yet, the first thing Mordecai wanted people to know about him was that he simply belonged to God. Not his descendancy from Saul, the first king of Israel, not his relationship to Jeconiah, the last king of Judah, not his standing as a Benjaminite with the greatest right to reclaim Israel alongside Judah. and not even his standing as a top official in the largest empire of the world at that time. The very first thing Mordecai wanted the world to know was that he was a follower of the God of Israel. And this is where we see the old and the new intersect today, because to me, Mordecai brings to mind another Benjaminite besides Saul, son of Kish. And actually, it is a Saul, but a different one. A Benjaminite named Saul, who later became known as Paul. A Benjaminite who wrote twice to the Corinthians, "Let him who boasts, boast in the Lord." A Benjaminite who said that all that pedigree was literally garbage compared to the surpassing glory of God. So just like the Apostle Paul, Mordecai considered his relationship with God to far surpass anything and everything that the world considered praiseworthy, all those titles that he had. And that's what drove all of Mordecai's responses and decisions that we see in the book of Esther. And in fact, if you read the whole book, you'll see that Mordecai's supreme loyalty to God is exactly what set the whole drama of Esther in motion in the first place, when he refused to bow down to Haman. So Mordecai, this man living in exile as part of a conquered people, was willing to risk his standing in the king's court and really his life, just like Daniel had been. Really, just like Daniel, Mordecai trusted his relationship with God over everyone and everything else. And so if you think about it, really, without Mordecai, such a time as this, when he stood for God, there never would have been Esther's such a time as this. So I hope you've seen a new glimpse of someone that is often overlooked when we think about the book of Esther. And I thought that I would leave you with a little bit of homework, something to ponder, really. If you were to write a one-verse introduction, one-sentence introduction of yourself for the world, like Mordecai did, one statement that would summarize all that you are, what would it be? And would it be different in some ways from what someone else might write about you, looking at your life from the outside? And what would you list first? And so maybe these questions can be a place where we ask God to give us insight into ourselves and ways that we can each grow more into the person He has created us to be, especially as we live in community with others. Now, I'll miss you next week and probably the one after that, because instead of baking challah next Friday, I will be having foot surgery, my third. But if you miss me, you can always watch or listen to an old episode and catch up. There's already 19 to choose from. And I do look forward to being with you again soon. But in the meantime, today, I wish you a happy, restful holiday.